The facts, the texts are the texts, and I think that the evidence will be clear.
That Ventura had a choice and that she chose to participate in those sexual encounters.
Where she is entertaining other people in the bedroom. He enjoyed having the freak-offs.
She's being asked specifically about the drug use.
She is clearly excited about.
Are you familiar with the Diddy trial? The music entrepreneur became completely enraged when the prosecution displayed his phone messages with his ex-girlfriend Cassie Ventura. However, not just any messages. They presented evidence that directly contradicted Diddy's claims from months ago. While Diddy's lawyers scrambled to protect Diddy, the judge had to grant an injunction. And that was just the beginning of day 4.
Ventura on the witness stand for a fourth day in the federal criminal trial against hip-hop mogul Sean Diddy Combs. The defense continuing cross-examination this morning, confronting her with dozens of her own messages, many explicit, hoping to convince the jury she was an eager sexual partner who matched Combs' desires. I'm always ready to freak off, one message said.
She was into the freak-offs herself and was like a willing participant and was into all the freaky stuff, and essentially that was the crux of what they were trying to do.
And do you think they proved that or not?
I mean, there's texts like that from 2009, I'm always ready to freak off. There was some other texts where she was referencing like hitting him up about the FOs, as what they were referring to him. To me, like, yes, this doesn't look good, but at the same time, I think the timeline is crucial here. And these are texts from 2009, man. That was when they were first getting in the relationship. She was young. Obviously, they were in the honeymoon stage, and she was stoked to like, oh my God, I'm with Diddy. I'm living this lavish lifestyle. Of course, she's going to be saying things that she knows will curry.
4 of the Diddy trial started like any other day. The courtroom was empty save for the rare shuffling of papers and the usual hushed murmuring. Diddy sat calmly at the defense table in his tailored suit, occasionally leaning to whisper to his attorneys. It didn't seem out of the ordinary. The court was working through procedural issues, and most of the people in the room were just getting situated for another day of complex legal arguments. Then everything was suddenly different. The prosecutor stood up and stated when they brought up Diddy and Cassie's previously revealed text exchanges, nobody at first paid much attention to the facts they sought to present to the court. Each person in the room shifted in their seat. It changed the mood in the courtroom when the prosecution arrived with a folder full of printouts. Diddy responded immediately and with ferocity. His face abruptly lost its color, and his eyes widened. According to one courtroom reporter, a change in his breathing was apparent. Quick, sluggish breathing, that shoulders that sway swiftly, his palms, quietly resting on the table, tightened down so hard that his knuckles whitened. He's always been the picture of poise and calm in public, and one veteran courtroom writer said, "I've covered celebrity trials for 15 years, and I've never seen someone lose their composure so completely." As soon as the prosecutor began reviewing the texts, Diddy forcefully pulled back his chair and stood up. Shifting away from his lawyer's attempt to take his arm, Diddy took 2 steps toward the judge's bench. It was then when everything began. To highly unorganized, 2 of his attorneys jumped to his defense right away, one of them ejecting Diddy from the bench. The judge pounded his gavel as he called for order. Diddy was muttering something loud enough for the front row to hear, but not clearly enough to figure out as the court officers moved toward the defense table. One of the witnesses in the gallery described it as angry muttering that got louder by the word. His lead lawyer put a hand on his shoulder and spoke loudly in his ear, requiring him to be physically taken back to his seat. One of the judges called for an intermission of 15 minutes, but the damage was already done. Reporters were already rapidly tapping away on their phones. Normally a calm person, the music mogul had just lost his temper in front of everyone. The shocking thing wasn't only that this eruption happened. That was the time. Despite the fact that the book had not yet been read aloud, the mere hint of their presence was enough to cause this reaction. The content of those communications clearly had an impact on someone. On the resumption of the court, Diddy's attorney requested a nearly 10-minute meeting with the judge. Diddy stayed in his chair with his jaw firmly set, tight, unable to look at anybody. The tension in the room was so great that a knife could pierce it as the prosecution started to play the first of the text messages on the courtroom screen. Everyone understood why Diddy had responded in such a violent manner. A hidden conversation between him and Cassie was about to surface, exposing an aspect of their relationship that contradicted all he had been claiming for months.
Demonstrating that the facts are the facts, the texts are the texts, and I think that the evidence will be clear as the case goes on and Cassie's testimony goes on, and we'll see what the jury does.
And finally, we'll talk about Justin Bieber because he is finally addressing the Diddy stuff. There's been long speculation that somehow he's involved.
Surprised it took so long to address.
Well, he's clearing that up now, and also we'll talk about how people are scared for Justin Bieber because they think he's in a cult. They have to have it
by the end of today. Cassie will be done, so they have all day today to ask her whatever they want to ask her.
Because obviously, she's about to pop, and that's like,
which is totally understandable.
So if she did pop if she did give birth, let's say the technical term, over the weekend, you know what would happen then, Devin?
I don't.
Mistrial, baby.
Why do you say that? What?
Because she's due back on the stand to give testimony, and if she can't give testimony
anymore... No, she's giving testimony today.
I know. I was saying, what if...
Oh, like she gave birth and then
that's why, that's the reason. If she wasn't pregnant, I don't think the judge would have said you have to finish by today.
Oh, yeah, no, 100%. Obviously. That's the whole, that's the whole crux of the argument.
Obviously.
Yeah.
You didn't explicitly,
But Diddy's team is also pissed off because they're like, we want as much time as we can have.
Her voice is low at times. The defense did tell her if it's too much, I can read them, but there were many times early on this morning where she read some of those explicit details where she is clearly excited about a freak off and talked about entertaining other people in the bedroom.
And what has Diddy's demeanor been in this cross-examination as well?
There was a moment where Sean Combs was nodding in agreement when they brought up a message that he sent her where he said, you know, one of my favorite times of the freak-offs is when we're able to make love after. And then she responds, that's the same for me. Now, what's interesting here is that that does match what she told prosecutors or what she's been telling the jury all along, which is she did this and she said, but she really wanted to spend time with him after the fact. So he was shaking his head at this message where he's almost, I guess, agreeing that he did say, without him saying it, he enjoyed having the freak off and then having sex with her after the fact. And her saying, I agree with you, I love having sex with you after.
The prosecution knew their strategy well enough to wait until day 4 to reveal these texts. Before dropping this bomb, they carefully built their case, gathering witnesses and supporting documentation. There was a purpose behind the timing. They wanted the jury to grasp Diddy and Cassie's relationship before seeing their unfiltered, uninhibited chat. The prosecutors arranged the texts from the 3-year-old in chronological order. As 2017 progressed, the tone drastically changed, even if the initial interactions were innocuous enough. The late-night messages from July 2018 that Diddy sent hours after a public event when the pair appeared happy and in love said, "You think you can just walk away? Nobody walks away from me. I made you. I can break you just as fast," which truly shocked everyone. The timestamp was 2:43 a.m., right after they had returned from a renowned awards show. His response was quick. "Please stop threatening me. I'm afraid of what you'll do." Cassie responded after a few minutes. "You should ideally be." In fact, the courtroom gasped when that conversation took place. The screen appeared. Clearly, one juror was uncomfortable. According to the prosecution, Diddy's private threats were in stark contrast to his public image as a loving partner. A different collection of texts from March 2019 showed increasingly controlling behavior. "With whom were you chatting during the party? You seemed to be smiling at him," I noted. "Don't lie to me. I have people watching you everywhere. There's nowhere you can go that I won't know about," Diddy replied after Cassie emphasized that she only knew a professional photographer. Actually, what the jurors were surprised that the communications were perfectly in line with what was happening in their public chronology. Don't ignore the fact that Diddy texted Cassie 2 days after calling her the love of his life in a widely reported interview, stating, "This arrangement works because you do what I say." According to Cassie's testimony, the prosecution meticulously connected each set of texts to specific incidents. They found that the conversation frequently featured presents, apologies, threats, and then more controlling behavior. Their focus was on Diddy's frequent use of "like you" and "nobody will believe you." Perhaps the most painful was a text Diddy sent in September 2018 when he wrote, "I'm sorry about last night. I lost control. It won't happen again." Cassie got this text the day after she described an incident in her testimony where she said he had physically abused her. The final text released to the public claims that Diddy made an effort to silence Cassie after their breakup. "Don't forget our arrangement. For your silence, you have received payment. Should it break, there will be." This correspondence was delivered just weeks before he publicly described their split as amicable and mutually respectful. Diddy publicly stated that he appreciated women and maintained positive relationships with his former partners, but his private comments painted a very different picture. As Diddy's last words vanished from the screen, the contrast between these raw, unfiltered remarks and his carefully polished public persona could not have been more stark. For months, his own remarks had contradicted every assertion he had made.
During that time period, she was still having freak-offs with Diddy, and I think that was them trying to show, like, this wasn't a controlling thing. Here she was, like, hooking up with other people. She just was into the freak-off.
I kind of buy that, to be honest.
So...
Like, she's out of the freak-off thing. She is, when she's with Kid Cudi, or you know, allegedly with Michael B. Jordan, she's kind of out of the freak-off if she wants to be. So why do you keep going back? Yeah. I know it's kind of like a mental, like, yeah. She still loves Diddy. Diddy was jealous about her.
Oh, yeah, because that was another thing that the prosecutors were trying to do, is show that, that they had a very jealous relationship. She would get jealous when he's with Kid Cudi. Also, like, Kim Porter, Cassie would be jealous of Kim Porter.
Right.
Trying to show that, like, Cassie, you were in love with this guy. That's why you were jealous.
Right.
So, like, this was a real relationship.
It was just interesting to see Chris Brown.
I mean, he's always coming up somewhere, dude.
He is.
Chris Brown.
All right, final story of the week. Final story of the week. Justin Bieber is not a victim of Diddy. So this is one of those, like, rumors or whatever that was flying around in the months leading up to the trial. And to be honest, there was quite a few rumors flying around, like, you know, was there minors involved? Says if no other celebrity was part of Freak-Off, why are they in hiding? Are they in hiding though?
I don't think they're in hiding. I just think other celebrities didn't want to insert themselves. No one wants to be tied to Diddy one way or the other.
Even if you're at a white party, like just having a lot of fun,
yeah,
at, you know, one of Diddy's white parties, you don't want to be linked in any way.
No, and that's why, like, all those people, there's a few people I think that have come forward.
Diddy has recounted the same story time and time again since Cassie filed her complaint, denying all of the charges and presenting their relationship as one of love and being polite and reciprocal throughout their separation. However, his entire story was ruined by these text messages. Diddy said, "I have never and would never raise my hand to a woman. That's not how I was raised," as he looked directly into the camera during an interview with Entertainment Tonight that was conducted only 3 months ago. Speaking with tears in his eyes, he expressed his continued admiration for Cassie as in a pivotal moment in my journey at the press conference his team hosted. His spokesperson claimed that Mr. Combs and Miss Ventura had a cordial and solid personal and professional relationship after his lengthy Instagram post in which he described her charges as completely false and a desperate attempt to raise money. The fact that they even posted those old photos of them together, showing them having a good time, suggested that Cassie was making this up. But the narrative that was communicated by the text messages was very different. They had a civil discussion. While Diddy was updating the world compliance, he was threatening her by private text. Although he expressly said he wanted her well, his messages were controlling every move she made. It is inconsistent. This was a point the prosecution was careful to highlight. A huge display board displayed Diddy's public statements and private texts, often delivered on the same day, in a horrible timeline. Lawyers watching the trial viewed one column that showed his interview in which he asserted mutual regard, while the other included him emailing her, stating, "Nobody will believe you anyway." The strategy surprised them. Outside the courthouse, A trial expert said that this kind of blatant disagreement ruins credibility. Not only do the texts affect him, but they also reveal a different side of him than the one he has presented to the public. It seemed that Did's repeated public denials that he had ever been physically abusive were the contradiction that most incited his anger. Although he stated in a January statement that "I have never physically abused someone," one of his texts specifically mentioned what happened last night and conveyed contrition for going out of control. Sent the morning after an incident Cassie had testified about, his public claim that their breakup was a considerate and respectful decision seemed especially weak in the context of texts he sent warning that he would take action if she spoke up. His carefully crafted image as a respectable ex-partner collapsed when he reminded her that her silence had been purchased with money, possibly because Ethy's texts contradicted his claim that he had always supported Cassie's independence and career, showed constant surveillance, questioning of her conversation partners, and reminders that he made her and could destroy her just as easily. Cassie sat in the courtroom, looking straight ahead, not even looking at Diddy when his tirade interrupted the proceedings, and her lawyer silently supported her by lightly touching her arm. As each disparity between his private and public communications became more obvious, her presence during these disclosures further strengthened the prosecution's case.
And dragging her. But the defense said Ventura's participation in the freak-offs was at times her idea, showing a text message from days earlier that said, "Baby, I want to FO so bad."
You proposed a freak-off, a defense attorney said. You kept asking him.
Combs' lawyers revealed he overdosed on painkillers in 2012, asking Ventura, were the worst years associated in any way with his drug use? Yeah, I would say. The defense hoping to convince the jury Combs became violent not to coerce Ventura into sex, but because he was an addict. They argue he may have been abusive, but that he's not guilty of sex trafficking.
Yeah. And then I think things might have just spiraled out of control, and at the end, do I think that she wanted to do those things? No.
No, I don't think she wanted to do it at the end.
But it
could
does
be more explicit about it.
True.
I wish there was a paper trail of her like being more, because then he'd be cool.
Yes, I agree with that. And yeah, so yeah, these texts don't look.
She wore a black pantsuit, minimal makeup, and her hair tied back, and she waited in silence until the texts were made public, talking to her lawyers and occasionally taking notes on a small pad. Cassie looked ready for another routine court appearance. But when the prosecution disclosed that they had the text messages, her posture immediately became rigid. She sat up straighter, her shoulders taut as the first thing that happened. Cassie's breathing changed when a courtroom reporter saw the threatening texts, as if she had chosen to act as though he wasn't even present. One particularly unpleasant message caused her to take several deep breaths and close her eyes for a moment. The passage in which Diddy wrote, "You should be." She had experienced real anxiety rather than just words on a screen, and her legal team was always on the lookout for her. She was seated next to her lead lawyer, who would occasionally put an encouraging hand on her arm or speak in her ear. For a glass of water, you could see her reliving those moments. One trial witness later told reporters, her expression conveyed exactly what those texts meant to her. They had clearly prepared her for the physical arrangement of the courtroom highlighted the tension between the ex-couple, with Cassie and Diddy sitting on opposite sides of the room, at least 30 feet apart, and court officials positioned themselves in a strategic buffer zone. There was a discreet but noticeable security measure in place, with one officer standing directly in the line of sight between Cassie and Diddy. Throughout the entire disclosure, Cassie never looked in Diddy's direction, and her demeanor remained unchanged except for a slight tightness as she stared straight ahead during his scream. The courtroom's chief concern was whether Cassie would now be asked to testify on these specific messages that the prosecution had reportedly been delaying placing her on trial, and her deliberate refusal to make eye contact told a lot about their relationship. Cassie closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath upon seeing the wording about the consequences of breaking her silence, and then her lawyer leaned over and muttered something that made her nod slightly. The one time she appeared on the verge of losing it, but she quickly regained her composure. The judge seemed affected by the intense emotion in the room, and after the last text was shown, he called for a 20-minute break to acknowledge the sensitive nature of the evidence. Cassie finally allowed herself to show emotion as she got up. to leave, shedding a single tear that she quickly wiped away before squaring her shoulders and heading out with her legal team. One could feel the excitement until these writings were added. Would she have to describe these conversations in her own words?
They're coming in, they're very alert, and I think this is one of those testimonies where you have no choice but to pay attention and almost be flabbergasted, obviously, at some of what you're hearing, because it's not only just insight into somebody's sex life, but the details are disturbing at times, especially during that prosecution testimony when we saw some of the alleged abuse, or we saw pictures of her after a beating of some kind, according to her. But the jurors are definitely paying attention. I don't see anyone that's not keeping their focus on Cassie Ventura, and also I noticed them taking notes a lot of times.
And the children, as they were exiting court yesterday, 2 of the girls were seen crying. How emotional have they been in court?
Again, I cannot imagine if that was my father or somebody close to me up there and having to hear details of their sex life. Those are young women. They lost their mother, one of them, the twins. So no one can probably quite understand what it is that they're going through, but I think that's something that you think about on both sides, you know, to look at Alex Fine, which is Cassie Ventura's husband, and think about him having to listen to all that's being said about the type of woman that Cassie Ventura was versus the person that's expecting, you know, their 3rd child together now. So whether it's Combs' family or Ventura's family that's there to support her, her brother and her husband, Alex Fine, I think it's difficult on both sides. Seeing him taking notes from the beginning, I see him put his glasses on. He gets very close to the screen when they're reading some of those text messages, so he's paying attention.
Now, Ventura confirmed that she and Combs had conversations about a swingers lifestyle, but at the freak-offs, they were very different.
Yeah, so she talked about this idea where I guess Combs wanted her to watch him have sex with another woman. She said that happened 2 or 3 times, but that he mentioned it frequently.
Kim Porter came up today in testimony. What was the significance there?
The defense said early on that this case would be about infidelity, love, and jealousy. And this is where they brought that up today when they brought up Kim Porter's name. The defense asked Cassie Ventura, are you jealous, or were you jealous of Kim Porter? And Ventura sort of contemplated, but did get to this moment where she said, knowing that Combs spent holidays with his family, which meant with Porter, did bother her. And she admitted that. They also pointed out that there was testimony where she talked about being insanely jealous overall as a girlfriend. So, yeah.
We're hearing the judge wants Cassie off the stand tomorrow. Will the prosecution and defense get equal time?
Yeah, as long as there aren't any additional motions, I think that is the goal, to have her off the stand by tomorrow.
Why do you think that? What's the reasoning behind wanting her off the stand tomorrow?
Judge Howard Richter has been in charge of a tight ship since the trial started. Known for his direct approach, he had kept both legal teams under strict control, barred grandstanding, and limited media access in the courtroom. Judge Richter answered quickly when Diddy stood up and tried to approach the bench, banging his gavel and shouting, "Mr." The judge's tone became even more harsh as Diddy continued, saying, "Combs, get back to your seat right away." He had been particularly demanding about decorum, making it plain that his courtroom was neither a concert venue nor a press conference despite Diddy's star status. Court officials, please, the defendant should remain seated. All will be well. In this courtroom, Diddy's activities exceeded a number of court regulations, making threatening gestures, trying to approach the bench without being called, and getting up without permission were all considered violations of standard judicial protocol. Any of these actions could result in charges of contempt of court, which has consequences, such as jail time. A decision was made quickly by the court officials. 2 of them came up to Diddy and stood between him and the official as he stood up. There was a 3rd police officer near the gallery, clearly concerned that things might develop worse. Their swift action prevented what might have been an even. Judge Tor did not detain Mr. Combs following the 15-minute recess, which is a more serious interference. This is not a topic that can be negotiated, he said, adding, any further disruptions of this nature will result in you being held in contempt of court. The chief legal advisor for Diddy was then consulted by the judge. You cannot keep your customer under control, and that will have consequences for both of you. Additionally, the judge issued a formal warning that would be documented in the court file. For the record, it is intolerable that the defendant is so disrespectful of the court's procedures. It will be necessary for me to consider bringing a contempt case if I throw another fit. What majority of people are not aware of the significant changes this incident made to the judge's trial approach? Before Did's outburst, Judge Richter had made generally fair rulings, sometimes accepting the defense's arguments, evidence gathered after the occurrence, and the court took the unusual step of giving the jury clear instructions on what happened. During the proceedings, the defendant's behavior should be ignored. You must base your decision solely on the information presented. You cannot have emotional outbursts in this courtroom. This lesson was crucial since research indicates that juries are often influenced by the acts of a defendant in court, even when they are told to ignore them. Judges have a lot of discretion, according to the legal experts representing the trial, and Diddy's outburst likely damaged his standing with the court. Judges frequently impose harsher guidelines when a defendant shows signs of impairing their self-control. Now that these inflammatory text exchanges are on the record and the court is clearly irritated by Diddy's behavior, the entire course of the trial has changed. As one legal observer stated, Judge Richter was already strict, and now he'll be keeping a close eye on Diddy. After Diddy's staff vehemently denied the charges, they made a last-ditch attempt to lessen the damage that his own words and actions had inflicted. This particular question isn't just regarding winning the case. The possibility of things getting worse worries me. It started out as just another well-known legal battle but has now grown into something that might destroy Diddy's career. These texts make Diddy's identity clear. Not the smooth-talking music mogul, but someone who overshadowed and intimidated his ex-girlfriend in private. As the fifth day of the case starts tomorrow, legal experts wonder if Diddy's side will attempt to come to an agreement. Why risk further secrets being revealed when damage control has already begun and certain things cannot be explained away? The question of whether Diddy will win this case is of little consequence.